In life, we all need friends. And when you're a successful mob boss and one of the most powerful in the history of the American mob, you surely need close confidants. In the case of Vincent Gigante, that was no more true. His trusted messenger, Dominick Cirillo, next on Sit Down Shorts. Dominick Cirillo was born July 4th, 1929, in Harlem, New York. He was the son of Colombo Capo, Alphonse Cirillo. Now, the elder Cirillo was under the guise of Joe Magliaccio, who was part of the Profaci crime family, and he was under the guise as well of the Joe Profaci wing. Now, as we know, the Profaci wing would war with younger members, Joe Gallo and his brothers. Now, keep in mind, Joe Gallo and his brothers were absolutely pissed off that Profaci had their mentor, Frank Abadamarco, killed. So they started taking mobsters and kidnapping them. One of them was Joe Magliaccio, and the Colombo Profacis were growing sick of the Gallo brothers. So they would have Lawrence Gallo, the brother of Joe Gallo, basically choked and strangled. The obviously goal was to kill him. Luckily for him, a cop walks in and he survives. He will not identify the attackers as they ran out of the bar. One of the attackers allegedly is said to have been Alphonse Cirillo. Now, the elder Cirillo would eventually become a capo regime in the Profaci crime family and would actually be named years later in the Valachi hearings. During his teenage years, though, his son, Dom Cirillo, would take up boxing, and that's where he met his longtime friend, Vincent Gigante. Now, Gigante was a very successful boxer, as we know. He would actually win fights and would down the road fight at MSG. Both Cirillo and Gigante were under the guise and mentorship of their manager, Tommy Ryan Aboli, who was a longtime member of the family. Now, for Cirillo, his boxing career was not as successful. In fact, he would lose all three fights that he would fight in and would only fight 16 total rounds. Now, just because Dom Cirillo was not a good boxer, that's not to say he wasn't a dangerous individual. In the late 40s, Dom Cirillo had become a heroin trafficker and at one point was bringing in $100,000 a week. Keep in mind, in today's standards, that would mean he was making over $1 million a week. That was big money for a young kid like Cirillo. Now, it was also said that he would wholesale and deal only with middlemen with true blue, pure white. So he was a stone cold drug dealer. He was making a lot of money. And in 1952, he would eventually be arrested and would go to prison for it. However, he wouldn't go to prison for very long. And once he was arrested, it was said to be one of the largest busts in NYPD history. Now, in the 60s, obviously, Vincent Gigante would again continue to gain power. In 1969, Vito Genovese would pass away, and Benny the Squint Lombardo would take over the family. In 1981, Lombardo would step down and would name Vincent Gigante the boss of the Genovese crime family. Now, as we know, Vincent Gigante was one of the most secretive mob bosses in history. He would never deal with underlings. He would never conversate with people underneath Cirillo, and he would never be mentioned by anyone in the family. And if they would be mentioned, and if he would be mentioned, they would be killed. Now, obviously, that secrecy would mean you would need an important messenger, and there was no one more trusted by Vincent Gigante over Dom Cirillo. Cirillo was his friend, his confidant, his messenger, and would actually take over and run Vincent Gigante's loan sharking operations throughout his time as boss. Now, as we know, during the 80s and 90s, Vincent Gigante would become one of the most powerful people in the history of the mob, grossing millions of dollars yearly in the most powerful crime family in the country. In 1997, though, as we know, the insanity defense would fail, and Vincent Gigante would eventually be sentenced to life in prison. At that point in 97, the boss becomes Dom Cirillo. He becomes acting boss. It wouldn't last long, though. In 1998, Dom Cirillo would step down due to health problems, And currently, the family has continued to be run by Liborio Barney Bellomo. And again, that is alleged, and he is reputed. In 2004, though, Dom Cirillo would gain infamy in American mob history. On May 9, 2004, Dom's estranged son, Nicholas, would be reported missing by his wife. Now, a few weeks prior, he was at a New York real estate office in the Bronx where he would get into an argument and squabble with Vincent Basciano Jr., son of reputed Bonanno boss Vincent Vinny Gorgeous Basciano, and a Bonanno member called Dominick Cirillo. From what was said, there was an argument, there was a push of some sort of argument ensues. At that point, many believed that once Cirillo goes missing, Dom Cirillo was going to act. You're not going to just kill the son of a former boss and get away with it. A lot of people believed Vincent Basciano Sr. was behind the killing. Nothing ever happened, though, with Dom Cirillo. He never looked for retribution. Nothing went on. In 2005, Joe Massino, former boss of the family, had become a secret government informant and was in prison with Basciano. In a taped conversation, Massino would ask Basciano, did we have anything to do with the Cirillo hit? Basciano would respond, absolutely not. That came from Dom. That came from Dom. Which would lend us to actually believe that the person behind the killing and disappearance of Nick Cirillo was his own father, Quiet Dom Cirillo. Down the road, it was said that they had met, Basciano and Cirillo said he took care of it and that he apologized for any transgressions. Now, it must be mentioned, Nicholas Cirillo and his father Dom were estranged, but this was his own blood. The problem was that Nick had become a liability. He was a drug addict, and his constant behavior problems were becoming an embarrassment for his father. And I think this might have been the straw that broke the camel's back. But it's something that not many mobsters can say. In fact, none can say it. There's very few instances where a mob figure has had his own son killed. It's actually pretty incredible. In 2008, Dom Cirillo would be sentenced to 4 years in prison for racketeering. He would eventually get out and assume role of consigliere in the Genovese crime family. However, due to old age, he would retire. And to this day, at the age of 92, Dom Cirillo is still alive, as far as I know. Dom was always said to be a very low-key individual. He would drive around in inexpensive cars. He would use secretive tunnel systems to evade law enforcement tails in New York. And he lived in a very nondescript attached home in the Bronx. Dom Cirillo, a guy that, whether you believe it or not, or you want to agree to it or not, was a true blue gangster. And he was the close confidant of one of the most powerful people ever. There wouldn't be as a successful Vincent Gigante without people like Dom Cirillo. And in the end, even your blood can be killed because of the mafia. Next week on Sit Down Shorts, we'll talk about the murder and eventual testimony of John Veazey and his brother Billy Veazey, which would happen on October 5th, 1995. We'll talk about that homicide, and we'll talk about John Stanfa and John Veazey's involvement in the Philadelphia Mafia. Have a great week. Thanks for watching. As always, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss a Sit Down Short. And go check out our podcast, The Sit Down, Unorganized Crime Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts.